Chuck Ringel, I was a lieutenant when I was in Vietnam. I stayed 7 years and got out as a lieutenant.
I'm Gary Carpenter, Gunner's Mate 3rd Class.
David Stevenson. I was a radarman seaman when I was in Vietnam. When I got out of the Navy, I was a 2nd class radarman. This is Mike Dorman. He was a 2nd class engineman in Vietnam.
I was a skipper and officer in tactical command of how many boats did we have that day?
There was a 10-boat operation.
10 boats, and operating off a sea float down in the Khao Mau Peninsula. And we had Vietnamese troops aboard, and we had pulled a raid. And after we pulled the raid, which didn't amount to anything, typically the operation was split the boats in half. If we do catch fire, we do get ambushed, put the troops on the beach and they would make a sweep. Anyway, after no action on that op, we, on the way back, Army light observation helicopter that was working with us spotted bad guys. And we went in, split the troops. I'm sorry.
In the
Canal. It's in the write-up, just off of the Kulan River, and we split up. I was in the lead group, and we hit the beach. The troops started getting off the boat down by cargo nets on the bow, and we had 2 or 3 command detonated Claymore mines. The couple of the Vietnamese were as high as his gun tub.
One of them was standing right on the mine.
And the one Claymore hit us completely full on. The after action count was 181 holes in the hull. We almost lost the boat. Typically we get the help out of the fire zone. In this case, when we got out of the fire zone, I was fortunate enough that day to have a medical department, Chief Corpsman Catino, and he checked us all out. I think 3 of us were wounded, 4 of us were wounded. We had to take the one gentleman off the boat onto another boat, and he was eventually medevaced to the U.S. Since I had the medical team of 1 on board, I then turned around and went back to see what he could do for the Vietnamese. And then we got out of there, had to get somebody alongside to help us, and we finally made it to the other bank where we could tie off to a tree and start damage control. The hull was almost, or the bow was almost underwater.
There was only one hole in my gun tub, but the chunk of Claymore that came through there hit my flakjack. Found out just a few years ago from these 2, they were on the stern of the boat, and I found out just a couple of years ago that we were receiving enemy fire from the opposite shore, so didn't even know that.
Like Gary said, it was the first time in Vietnam that I heard bullets singing by my head, and I figured if I can hear them, they're getting way too close. So Mike and I were on the fan tail just trying to protect everybody else from the other side while we're getting the troops and trying to get out of there.
Suppressive fire, yes. We were in deep trouble in terms of damage control. We started plugging holes with both our crew and other crews, and we offloaded ammunition in order to lighten it. And we found as we were offloading the mortar rounds inside under the cabin that there were a bunch of them with shrapnel. We were luckier than hell to make it through the day. There was EOD had a mite boat with a A-frame nearby at seafloat. And once we got enough to get underway, we got to seafloat, and then they could lift up the hull. And then we did much more extensive damage control, just enough to get us back to Antoy. I think it was the following day.
And the one thing I remember too on that was when we were beached across trying to get the damage control done, they called the fixed wing aircraft in. You remember that plane?
Yeah.
OV-10, Air Force, tank killer.
You could see him drop those bombs, and it was.
Within just a couple of minutes after we got to the other shore, trying to keep the boat from going clear under, we had swift boats tied up both sides of us trying to hold us up, along with a few other swift boats that were dispatched from Operation Seafloat to come around the corner to help us. They brought P250 pumps that pumped 250 gallons a minute. It took 3 of them to pump the water out of our boat as fast as it was coming in. It got a little better as they got some of the holes plugged, but I was watching, they were plugging holes with spent brass and DC plugs and pieces of tree, whatever they could find.
They had 2 of them running to keep us afloat to go back while they towed us back to seafloat.
I think I went into immediate shock. The corpsman saw me get knocked back away from my guns, and within seconds he was on top of the pilot house trying to find out where I was bleeding from and telling him to get away from me so I could shoot my guns. And I finally told him that George on the bow was hurt worse. He got out of my way.
I was on the edge combing of the port hatch, right above where we took the hit. And I got knocked back on my ass at the pilot house. And didn't go into shock. I was just trying to do the right thing, do my duty.
I think for Mike and I, the instinct took over, and it's, I mean, you're fired.
And I guess I was in so much shock. The last time I saw our quartermaster who got medevac, I told him, I says, you know, for the life of me, I can't remember how or when you got off our boat. And he told me that I looked down and asked him if he was okay.